All right, so the goal of this video is going to be to get an input down here where we can enter in some text and send new messages. We're going to call this component the chat text box component. So let's go ahead and create this component. So inside of your source folder, create a new folder that we'll call chat text box. Actually, I'll do all lowercase so we can follow the convention, chat text box. And then inside of here, just create two files, a styles.js file and a chat text box.js file. Inside of the chat text box, we're going to go ahead and do a couple of imports. We will go ahead and import React from React, text field from @material-ui/core/text field, send, and that's going to be an icon, so import it from @material-ui/icons/send. Then our styles from our styles.js file, and of course with styles so that we can do our stuff. So let's do class chat text box component extends react.component, and then in here we'll do a render and then return with a div inside that just says hello from chat text box. And then down below the class, we'll do an export default with styles, and the chat text box component. Then I want you to go into the description below, find the code, go to the styles.js file for the chat text box component, and I want you to paste in the styles. And once you have all of that, we're ready to start working on this chat text box component. So let's go ahead and give this div a class really quick. But before we do that, let's destructure classes. So const classes is equal to this.props. And then inside of here, give a class name. And we're just set it equal to classes.chat text box container. And that way, when we put it in the dashboard in just a moment, we will be able to see it. So below the open and closing curly braces where we're conditionally showing the chat view component, let's go ahead and put a space there. But first we need to import our chat text box. So import chat text box component from, as we double dot / chat text box / chat text box. And then where we put that space down here, we'll go ahead and put this in just so we can make sure that it's displaying as expected. So chat text box component, go ahead and save that, and then we should see hello from chat text box down here. Great. So one thing that, if you notice, I'll go ahead and refresh this so we have no chats selected whatsoever. We really don't want the chat text box to be visible unless we're actually inside of a chat. So we're going to conditionally render this chat text box component inside of the dashboard. So what are we going to conditionally render it based upon? Well, go ahead and put in your open and closing curly braces so we can put some JavaScript in. And what we want to do is we want to say if this.state.selected chat. So if we have a selected chat, or if selected chat is not equal to null is what I should say, because here's the thing, since it's an index, it can have an index of 0, so selected chat could actually be 0, which is a falsy value in JavaScript, so we don't want to do it whether it's true or false. We just want to say if it's not equal to null. And also, if we're going to put a unary operator here, so if not this.state.new chat form visible. So if both of those are the case, then we'll go ahead and render out our chat text box component. Otherwise, we'll just return null. So when I save this, go ahead and see that it's not being displayed, but when I open up a chat, now you can see it is in fact being displayed. So let's go inside of our chat text box component and actually do the real HTML for this. So I'm going to shrink this window down a bit so we can see the code editor a little bit better. I'm going to get rid of this hello from chat text box and make this look a little bit better for us to write code inside of. So there we go. So we want to have a text field. So we've imported text field from Material UI, And the text field is going to have some stuff, some props. And so the first one is going to be placeholder. And the placeholder is just going to be the text that is displayed before you enter in anything. So it'll just say type your message ... Okay. And then we want to also have an onKeyUp function. So onKeyUp, and then open and closing curly brace. We're going to accept the event, and we're going to pass it to our own function that we're going to call user typing. And we're going to also pass that event into it. So let's create that function really quick, user typing, which we know is going to take the event. And then for now, we'll just log user typing. And we'll come back to this in just a moment. So then we need to give it an ID. We'll give it an ID is equal to chat text box, which we might not actually use, but it's good to just have it in case you do need it later on. So let's give this a class name and set that equal to classes dot, let's call it chat text box. And then we'll have an on focus as well. Okay. So whenever there's an on focus, in other words, whenever we click inside of the input, you saw during the demo that whenever we clicked inside of the input, if this message was unread, it would then mark it as no longer being unread. We'll come back to that when we work on the unread functionality, but for now, let's go ahead and put this in here. This dot user clicked input, which is going to be a function. So we'll say user clicked input. And then for now, we'll just simply console.log clicked input. Okay, save that. So let's see what we have so far. When I click on a message, now you can see that there's an input down here. And let me clear this console out. You can see there's an input in here, and when I click inside of it, it says clicked input. And then whenever I start typing in here, it says user typing. So we know we have our listeners set up properly. Let's go ahead and add in our submit button, which is going to go directly here. And our submit button is actually going to be an icon, which we imported above, called send with a capital S. And we'll give it an on-click function. And the function that we want to call whenever we click on the send button is submit message. And again, we'll just put this down here. We'll say submit message as a function. And then we'll just simply console.log the word submit. And it's also going to take a class name, which is going to be, let's go ahead and get in here. Class name is equal to classes.send btn. Save that. Go ahead and click on your message, and now you can see that this is here. If I clear this out and I click on the send button, you can see now it logs the word submit. So we're going to need a little bit of initial state inside of this component. So let's create a constructor and then call super. And this .state, the initial state, is going to just simply have one chunk of state called chat text, and by default it will be an empty string. And so now that we have this state, we can update it whenever we're typing inside of the input. So let's go to our user typing function, and I want to just do a ternary operator that checks the event. So we pass the event into it, and if the key code for that event is equal to 13, which basically means it's checking the key that the user entered in, and if they, or that they typed in, and if it just so happens that whatever they pressed, if that was the enter button, the key code for the enter button is 13. If they pressed the enter button, we want to go ahead and call this.submit message. Otherwise, we want to say this.set state, and we want to update that chunk of state that we just initialized. That was called chat text, and we want to set it equal to e.target.value. Okay, so now we're updating the state as they're typing in the message. So we're going to want to validate the input whenever they try to send a message so that we're not sending anything that's empty. We don't want to send an empty message. So we'll just create a simple function called message valid, and it's going to be some very basic validation. It's going to accept text as the argument, or we'll just say txt. And all we're going to do is make sure that text is not an empty string, and also text.replace. And we're going to use a regular expression here, so that's going to be 2 forward slashes. And in between here, we'll do a backslash, an S, and then after the last forward slash, put a G. And what this is saying, here, let me actually finish this and I'll explain what it's saying. Put a comma and then 2 quotations, which represents an empty string. So what's happening here is it's saying it's going to find all of the space characters, and the G means global. If we didn't have the G here, it would only find the very first case where this is true. If we put the G here, it finds all of the space characters within the string, and we're replacing all of these space characters with an empty space. And basically what we're going to do is check for the length of that. So what this is saying is if text is not an empty string, or if it's not all empty spaces, so an empty space is like this. So if I were to come in here and just type in a bunch of spaces and click send, I want message valid to be false, and that's what we're checking right here. So go ahead and save that. And I also just noticed up here inside where I was setting the initial state, I put an equal sign. It's supposed to be a colon because it's an object, so don't want that. So what we want to do inside of the submit message function is first we want to check whether or not the message is valid. And then, if it is valid, we want to do two things. We want to call a property which we have not set yet, which is going to be a function from the dashboard component that we pass in as a property. We want to call that function, which we'll call something like submit message. And then after that, we want to clear the input. And so if we type in some stuff and I click submit and it submits the message, we want it to go ahead and then clear the input so that the user can type another message if they want to without having to manually backspace everything. So let's go ahead and start by calling message valid. We'll say if this.message_valid, and we'll use state. So we'll say this.state.chat text. We'll use the state to pass in as the chat text. We'll go ahead and put a comment in here that says call parent function, and then we'll go ahead and handle the clearing of the text box now. We'll say document.get element by ID. So we will be using that ID that we set earlier. Chat text box dot value is equal to an empty string. So let's see what happens when we submit a message. I'll type in some text and click submit, and now you can see that the text disappears. Now what we have to do is create that function inside of the dashboard component that we're going to pass in as a prop and then call it here. All right, so let's go ahead and go into our dashboard component and start creating the functions that we need in order to submit the message. So we're going to actually need a function called build.key, and it's going to take an argument called friend, which is going to be the username of the friend you're speaking to at the moment, and it's going to return the key. Now, if you remember what that looked like, I'll go ahead and comment this out for now. What that looked like was user1 : user2, and it was in alphabetical order. If you remember, that's what we're putting in Firebase as the key for the document. So it's always user1 : user2 in alphabetical order. So let's go ahead and return the key. So how are we going to do this? We're going to start with an array, and we're going to say this.state.email and friend. Okay, so we know that this.state.email is going to be the current user that's logged in, and we're going to pass friend as an argument here, so that'll be the email of the friend. Now we have an array of both of those. So what we want to do is sort it alphabetically, so we can just say .sort. JavaScript will handle that. It'll sort it alphabetically for us, and then we want to join the array with a colon so that it gives us a string like we would expect. So now that we have the build.key function, we are going to create our submit message function within the dashboard component. So submit message, and of course this is going to take a argument called message, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to say const doc key is equal to this.build doc key. Now remember, it takes a friend as an argument, so we actually need to get the friend. So what we will do is just say this.state.chats, and we're going to grab the current chat we're on, so it would be this.state.selectedChat, and we're going to grab the users, so .users, and we're going to filter it. So filter for each user, we want the user that is not equal to this.state.email, and we know that filter returns an array, and it'll only be one item in the array, and we'll go ahead and access it by using 0. So put a semicolon. So now we have the doc key here. So let's actually log this. Let's call console.log doc key. And I want to see this in action. So I'm going to go back into my chat text box and actually call it. But in order to call it, I have to pass it as a prop. So I'm going to copy submit message, and inside of the opening tag for chat text box, I'm going to call it submit message FN, and then I'm going to say this dot submit message. So now we're passing submit message, that function that we just created, as a prop to chat text box component. So I'm going to copy this prop name here, go back into my chat text box component, and where I put this comment, I simply want to call, well, we got to say this dot props. So this dot props dot submit message function. I'm going to go ahead and call it, and the message is going to be the this dot state dot chat text. So we're not actually submitting the message yet. I just want to make sure that our doc key is actually what we would expect, so that when I come in here and I click, I'll type in some stuff and then I click submit, we can see the doc key being logged, and you can see it's Bob at portexe.com, Zach at portexe.com, and it's in alphabetical order with a colon in between, so we know it's working. So since we know it's working, let's go back to the dashboard component. Looks like I was already in there. Go into the dashboard component, go to where we're logging the doc key. We don't need to log it anymore because we know it's working. So let's go ahead and make our Firebase call. Firebase, and I'm going to start going to the next line here just so you guys can easily see all the code. So Firebase dot firestore dot collection, and we know the collection is called chats. That's what we called it. And the doc is going to be the doc key that we created above. Cool. And we want to use the function called update. Okay. So we're going to update it with an object. And we know that the chats document has two things. It has messages, and it also has receiver has read. So messages, we're going to set that equal to Firebase.firestore.field value, which is a type within Firebase, .array union. Okay, this is built into Firebase. This is going to take an object, and what it's going to do is it's going to take a message object, and it's going to combine it with the messages that is already inside of the database. So in other words, it's going to add it to the array of messages that we already have stored in the database. So all we have to do is provide to array union a message object. Well, we know that a message object has a sender, which is going to be us, this.state.email, since we're the one sending the message. The message itself, which is going to be equal to message, which we're passing here. And we also want to add one more thing that we haven't added yet in the database, which is a timestamp. We want to add a timestamp. That way in the future, if you would like to display timestamps for each message, you can. It'll be very easy. We'll just simply set that to date.now, and JavaScript will handle that for you. So then the second thing was receiver has read. So receiver has read, we'll go ahead and put has read as false by default, because as soon as you send a message, they're not going to have, they won't have read it yet. So it'll be false by default. So I'm going to save this, put a little semicolon here really quick and save this. And I'm going to see what happens when I try to send a message. So I'm going to go into Bob at portexe.com, and I'm going to say test message LOL. And I'm going to click send, and you can see that it actually sends the message. So I want to see this in action. So I want to open a new incognito window, and I'm going to come over, bring this incognito window over here. I'm just going to copy over this link into my incognito window, and I'm actually going to log in as Bob at portexe.com really quick. So I'll log in, and you can see that test message is here. And as Bob, I'm actually going to send a message that says something like, hey man, I'm going to send it. And you can see it pop over on both sides. So you know that it's working as we were hoping it would. So if you're wondering, why the heck is it automatically updating on both sides? Well, if you remember when we go into our component did mount, what we're doing is whenever we have auth state change, we're calling all this stuff, right? So when we're logged in, this stuff gets called. Well, one of the things here, this on snapshot, is saying whenever the database is updated, we want to run this code. And when we submit a new message, that's considered updating the database. And so we're basically recreating that array and re-updating the state with the new chat, and then React automatically goes in and re-renders all of the components with the latest data. So it's automatically updating whenever you send a message. All right, cool. So far we're able to see the list of all the messages that you're associated with. You're able to see the conversation itself, and you're able to send messages. So if you liked this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.